Great. Well, thanks for the introduction there, Carla, and thanks to NCCN for putting everything on. Yeah, my name is Andrew Giacomelli. I'm a graduate student at Western Washington University. I'm also a seasonal ranger at North Cascades National Park, and I'm a GIS specialist for the Washington National Park Fund, or contract based at least. This project's been a collaboration between myself and North Cascades and Western Washington University. And just due to past internet connection issues, I'm gonna just have my video off for the remainder of the talk, just to let you all know. So my project here is mapping wilderness character degradation in the Stephen Mather Wilderness of North Cascades National Park Service Complex, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I got a lot to cover and to move through, so I apologize for speaking pretty quickly. But Carla, can we go to the next slide, please? So the passage of the United States Wilderness Act of 1964 established a national wilderness preservation system to be composed of federally owned areas designated by Congress as wilderness areas to provide for the protection of these areas and the preservation of their wilderness character. Although wilderness character is legally mandated for protection under the law, measurable qualities were not clearly defined until the publishing of Keeping It Wild in the early 2000s, which was later revised in 2015, with a federal interagency team working on behalf of the National Wilderness Preservation System. They defined wilderness character as a holistic concept based on the interaction of one, the biophysical environments being primarily free from modern human manipulation and impact, and two, personal experiences and natural environments, generally being free from the encumbrances and signs of modern society, and three, the symbolic meanings of humility, restraint, and interdependence that inspire human connection with nature. All these together, these tangible and intangible values define wilderness character. Next slide, please, Carla. Here's a flow chart that we got showing the hierarchies of qualities, indicators, measures, and data sources that are used to inform both wilderness character monitoring and mapping projects. I'm just going to go over the 5 qualities really quickly. The first is untrammeled, there at the bottom, being the wilderness is essentially unhindered and free from the intentional actions of modern human control or manipulation. 2, natural quality, that the wilderness is ecological systems are substantially free from the effects of modern civilization. 3 is the undeveloped quality, that the wilderness is essentially without permanent improvements or the sights and sounds of modern human occupation. 4, the outstanding opportunities for solitude or unconfined and primitive recreation quality, where the wilderness provides outstanding opportunities for recreation in an environment that's relatively free from the encumbrances of modern society. The 5th quality being the other features of value. This quality captures important elements or features of particular wildernesses that are not covered by the other 4 qualities. Typically, these are things like archaeological, historical, or paleontological features. So under this system, wilderness qualities are broken down into indicators and measures, which are used to inform these data sources. Quality and indicator criteria or categories, these are all nationally and federally consistent to adhere to federal mandates and to allow for trend monitoring, while the measures and data sources are locally determined due to individual and unique and specific attributes to each wilderness area. Next slide, please, Carla. The previous mapping studies that have been conducted have all been done through the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute, including some of the wilderness areas shown here, like the Death Valley Wilderness and Denali Wilderness and the Daniel J. Evans Wilderness and Olympic National Park, as well as the Boundary Waters Wilderness, which is managed by the United States Forest Service. Independently of the Aldo Leopold Institute, Glacier National Park has done, and I think they've since completed their wilderness character mapping project. And we're trying to do the second one independent of the Aldo Leopold Institute here at North Cascades. And on my next slide, I have a general reference map showing just the area, just to make sure everyone's familiar. North Cascades National Park Service Complex is comprised of the national park, and then 2 recreation areas, being Ross Lake and Lake Chelan. And then the Stephen Mather Wilderness, which is where I'm doing my character mapping project, is contained within the complex. That's that upper right image with the purple lines showing the boundary. On my next slide, I have a simplified version of my methods, very simplified. Basically, measures and data were identified and collected through a workshop with staff at NOCA, or North Cascades. Then data were cleaned and queried to only represent measures used in the project, and then assigned a wilderness character value. For example, 0 or 1 for the simple presence or absence of a measure, for binary measures like the index of non-native fish, or a range of values. 0 to 5, for example, represents degradation due to like things like visitor use nights.
But I was thinking,
oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, I thought I just heard.
Just sorry about that. Sorry, a reminder to participants, please keep your mics muted.
Oh, copy.
Tech assistants can mute that participant. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, no worries. So yeah, these data measures were assigned a value, and then they were later normalized onto a common scale so that they could be compared. Any data that was that had multiple years, I reduced it to only from 2015 to 2022 to have a common ground. Then all data were converted into raster data, if they weren't in that format already, to a 30 by 30 meter pixel grid. So every pixel is 30 by 30 meters, with each pixel containing a wilderness character value. Then measures were normalized for comparison using the slice tool in ArcGIS Pro, and measures for each indicator were then combined using a weighted sum to produce the indicator maps that I'll show you in the next couple slides. All the indicator maps were then summed together to produce their respective quality maps, and then the final total wilderness character degradation map was created by adding all of the quality maps together. Next slide, please. And I've got a lot of maps to go through, so I'm going to move through these a little bit quickly just to let you all know. This is the measures that went into the untrammeled quality. It has two indicators, one being the actions authorized by the federal land manager that intentionally manipulate the biophysical environment, and the other indicator being actions that are not authorized. Local measures used to inform this indicator included non-native fish removals, hazard tree removals, wildfire suppression zones, non-native plant treatment sites, illegal fish stocking, and human-caused fires in the wilderness. Click or next, please. Here's what the total untrammeled quality with all of the indicators summed up looks like. It should be noted that there's some debate on whether or not human-caused wildfires belongs in this indicator, because usually trammeling actions under the federal law are intentional. Yet I'm including it here because I'm presenting my university-related results. And I believe that even though some human-caused fires are not intentional, they still represent a significant trammeling action on the landscape that wouldn't have occurred without human activity. On the next slide, I've got a chart that shows the overall acres of degradation throughout the area. Just take a note that the y-axis on all of my acreage charts are on a logarithmic scale, just for better comparison or visual comparison. It was found that much of the Stephen Mather Wilderness was found to be 1,000 acres felt some sort of degradation. On the next slide, I've got the natural quality, which consists of 4 indicators: plants, animals, air and water, and ecological processes within the wilderness area. We didn't identify any, or didn't use any air and water measures due to a lack of spatial data, but the measures that were included a small index of non-native plant species, an index of non-native fish, and glacier retreat. And looking at my slide now, it looks like there's actually a typo. On my legend there, it's supposed to be instead of 1.6 illegal fish stocking, that should be 2.9 glacial retreat. That my mistake there. On the next slide, it'll show that most of the degradation occurring is due to generalized glacial retreat. That's what all the yellow there is. Another area that with visible degradation is kind of in the middle of the park. I'm not sure if you can see it at this resolution, but the Thunder Creek drainage also showed degradation due to the presence of non-native fish species from eDNA sampling. On the next slide, I have my chart showing the natural acres, or the amount of degradation we found in the area, which is mainly in that 60 value class 60, and that's mainly due to glacier retreat. On the next slide, we'll go over our undeveloped indicators, which included the presence of non-recreational structures, installations, and developments that are used for scientific or administrative purposes, as well as an indicator for the presence of private inholdings, only one of which occurs in this wilderness area, and the use of motor vehicles, motorized equipment, or mechanical transport, which included helicopter landings and deliveries from 2019 to 2022, and chainsaw use for trail maintenance for seasonal opening, logging, and brushing of trails. On the next slide, we'll see a image of what the degradation looks like throughout the area. You'll notice that the main visible areas of degradation occur throughout the trail systems, and this is where a lot of that motorized tool use is occurring, mainly chainsaws for logging and brushing out trails for the opening season. At this scale, it's kind of hard and challenging to see the pixels that were degraded by things like helicopter deliveries and non-recreational structures due to their small footprint. Remember, these are just 30 by 30 meter pixels, and some of them only cover just the 1 pixel, so it's hard at this resolution. It should be noted that helicopter landings are likely undersampled in this project due to incomplete data for 2021, and the fact that helicopters only counted as degradation when they actually touched down on the ground, meaning that things like flights over the heads of visitors wasn't actually measured. So kind of challenging to represent spatially. On the next slide, I have my charts for the degradation of different value classes within the undeveloped quality. You can see that much of the Stephen Mather Wilderness was largely unaffected. On the next map is the solitude quality, or excuse me, the next slide is the solitude quality. This one by far has the most amount of measures within it, so it kind of has the most detail. The indicators include the remoteness from sights and sounds of human activity in the wilderness area, which includes measures such as a remoteness index, a viewshed, administrative or ranger contacts on trails, and visitor use nights per campsite and per cross-country zone. Another indicator used was facilities that decrease self-reliant recreation, like trails and trail infrastructure, human waste infrastructure, and wireless cell phone coverage. On the next slide, I'll take you through my travel time model, or remoteness index, which was a weighted overlay performed using distance accumulation models to model the distance and remoteness from trailheads, trails, and social trails, as well as incorporating a cost surface using land cover type, impedance due to land cover type, and a slope angle classification. On the next slide, we'll see the distance accumulation model for remoteness of trailheads. The greener you get, the further away from trailheads you go. I'm going to move through these ones kind of quickly. On the next slide, we have the remoteness from trails throughout the wilderness area. On the next slide, we have the remoteness from social trails. The greener you go, the further you are from social trails. On the next slide, we've got a slope angle classification that is showing the green pixels are showing more difficult terrain to move through, as well as on the next slide, green is representing the types of land cover or vegetation that are most challenging to move through. All of this together will show us on the next slide what I've come up with as a remoteness index, where green pixels equal the most remote pixels in the park and brown equal the least remote. On the next slide, I'll show you a viewshed model that I created. Basically, it's identifying points and polylines that are visible to human development. So on the next slide, I've got the map of that actually. Shows that the most degraded areas due to viewshed impacts are adjacent to the roads and highways and power lines, most prominently in the Highway 20 corridor that bisects the middle of the wilderness. You can see the brown are the most degraded areas there. On the next slide here, I've got a map showing the different measures used for the remoteness from sights and sounds within the wilderness. There's a lot to take in there, I know, but I know that I'm a little short on time too, so I'm going to kind of hurry up through these. On the next slide here, I've got the indicator of facilities that decrease self-reliant recreation. and as well as restrictions on visitor behavior. We'll let you take that in for just a second there. On the next slide, I've got the actual output of the outstanding opportunities for solitude or unconfined and primitive recreation quality. Not only did it have the most amount of data measures, but it also showed the greatest spatial distribution across the entire wilderness, with the affected pixels throughout the wilderness area, with affected pixels throughout the entire wilderness area, mainly due to that remoteness index. On this next page, we have a chart of showing distribution of degradation in different value classes. This one saw degradation across the most value classes, as well as spatially across most of the wilderness area. On my next slide, I've got the fifth quality, which is the other features of value quality. For this one, eligible cultural sites were not included in this analysis to maintain their locational anonymity. And then next, these measurements are not just merely the presence of cultural or historical sites, but the actual trend in deterioration or stability. And then on the next slide, Carla, it shows that we've actually just got one spot of deterioration, and it was, you can't even see it on this map, so I actually got it on the chart on the next page if you would move to the next slide. It is about less than half an acre, which is pretty great, just one historical site. And then on the next slide, I've got the overall wilderness character map. So this is all of those qualities summed together. Shows that the least amount of degraded areas being furthest away from development and with the least amount of restrictions on visitor behavior. Next page, please. Or next slide, please. Great, thank you. I'd just like to say that, attempting to quantify wilderness as a place or a state of mind or in a map form is similar to realizing your own significance when you're deep in the woods off the trail. There's a lot more at hand than most recognize at first. Therefore, it's of the utmost importance to accept that the definitions and analyses of wilderness attributes are incomplete, as these are only models of real life. And this is only the generalized 30,000-foot view of wilderness character degradation in the Stephen Mather Wilderness using the available data sources. Yet these models help us spatially visualize something that is both intangible and invaluable to us all. And it's a necessary step forward to plan for and promote the protection of these wilderness areas. Thank you. Just keep it brief. There's a lot to unpack there. Sorry for moving through it so quickly there.
No, I wish we had more than 15 minutes to give you. That was a ton of information and really interesting. Yeah, I think I need a few days to absorb all that. But incredible work you've done there. I would like to remind audience members that you can put questions in the chat and I can read them out to everyone. We do have a few minutes for questions still, and or you can just raise your hand or turn on your mic. I've got a few questions to get the ball rolling. It's kind of a big one and maybe putting you on the spot a little, but as I know you're a researcher and not a park manager, but having looked at all this so much as you have, is there anything that maybe jumps out to you as a priority if you were a park manager looking at this data as issues that could be addressed by some changes in management?
There are so many things I think that you could look at to address, but I think that the deeper you look into it, I think that many of the qualities and protections, like for example, like the management restrictions on visitor behavior, that seems to like cover the most degradation to the entire area of the wilderness area. Yet those are in place in order to protect other qualities, like the natural quality specifically. So it makes it really challenging because some of these qualities and measures are actually in place to preserve other ones, which makes it challenging to actually enact those changes, because otherwise it's going to harm another quality. Does that help answer? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the dog, no dogs allowed. That it's interesting.
Exactly. Or like the or having to areas where you're not allowed to have fires, or areas where you're required to have a bear canister. Those are to protect other normally the natural quality. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating stuff. Anyone else have any? I don't see any questions in the chat. I'll say another thing then I thought was interesting was the that I guess you said it was in 2008 or 2015 that the qualities of wilderness character were formally elucidated by the government, and that modern human. I know it's a little outside, but I know there's been a lot of discussion over what is wilderness, with knowing this is an indigenous landscape and humans have always been a part of it, and it was just how do you was that word modern added at that point? Do you know?
That's a good question. It might be in the original Wilderness Act of 1964. I can't remember if it was the old term man or if it was modern human. I can't remember exactly specifically what was used there. But that does make it a really big challenge, right? Because a lot of what we do, especially as recreators, is bringing modern equipment, modern gear and stuff into these wilderness areas. I think the most important component of that is that that modern human development isn't permanently there, is that it ends up leaving. And so that's why it just like only doing things like bear lockers and development that was actually used that's permanently there, like scientific monitoring equipment and administrative infrastructure, was the only stuff that I could actually represent there. But yeah, it makes it really challenging because I mean we're putting definitions on things that might be intangible to some, but are also not completely agreed upon. So we're kind of making these pigeonhole definitions so that we can do visual things like this to create tools like this. So I think it needs to be taken with a grain of salt in that context.